Hello, everyone. Welcome. And on behalf of the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism, we were excited to start the second of our 9 sessions of the Red Emerald Resilience Training Program. This training series is supported by the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation's Development and Destination and Development Partner Relations team. My name is Danielle Thoughts. I am the director of the Wallace Stegner Center's Environmental Dispute Resolution Program, which is based at the University of Utah. I'm also Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism partner and will be facilitating today's session. A little bit of information about the Red Emerald Resilience Training. As many of you may know, probably some of you all too well, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in serious economic setbacks and challenges for the tourism industry and many destination communities throughout Utah and across the nation. Many businesses are still recovering and or learning how to adapt in this post-pandemic world. To address this need, the Utah Office of Tourism and the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism came together to build this webinar training series with the purpose of helping the Utah tourism industry and local businesses recover from COVID-19 and become more resilient to future shocks and changes. We consulted with industry leaders and business owners throughout the state via interviews and a survey, and we used what we found from that interview or from those interviews and survey to design this series. The topics and design of the training sessions reflect what we heard was most important. Our ultimate goal in conducting this training series is that through sharing best practices, strategies, lessons learned, and success stories, we can help Utah's tourism industry and businesses thrive in an ever-changing world. For more information about the Red Emerald Training Program, you can go to the website, which I'm going to put in the chat. Shares information about our upcoming sessions, registration, and also we'll share information about past sessions, including past session recordings. The Red Emerald Training Series is organized into 3 segments. The first segment focuses on communication for resilience. The second focuses on resources for resilience. And the third will be on planning for resilience. Today's webinar is the second in the Communications for Resilience segment, and we'll explore the topic of how to educate new-to-nature tourists about responsible recreation. We are going to specifically focus on things that the tourism industry and businesses can do. However, I expect that everything we cover will be relevant to most people who are interested in this topic. Today, we are joined by 5 special guests who will be discussing this topic and sharing their wisdom. That includes Bianca Lyon, the Tourism Director of Community and Partner Relationships for the Utah Office of Tourism, Matt Blocker, the Outdoor Recreation Planner for the Bureau of Land Management, Katie Bouet, the President of Outdoor Advocacy Project, who is also with #Recreate Responsibly, and Danielle McNiven, the Assistant Director for Tread Lightly, as well as Elizabeth Hora, an archaeologist for the Utah State Historic Preservation Office. Each of our speakers brings a unique perspective on this topic, and I think you will have a lot to learn from all of them. So thank you to our speakers. We will get the panel started in a moment. Before we do that, for the audience, a few important things to note. This session is being recorded. We will share the session recording along with the webinar summary via our website. So if you know others who weren't able to join today, there will be a chance to watch this after today's session. We hope you'll share the session recording and summary. In a moment, we'll jump into the interactive presentation, and I want you all to know that throughout the session, those of you on the live webinar should expect to engage. We're going to ask you some questions to respond to, and we will also take your questions to the panelists throughout the presentation. How this is going to work. We want to keep your questions to the panelists separate from your responses to the questions we're going to ask you. So if you have any questions for the panelists throughout today's talk, please use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you can click on that. You can submit your questions again through that Q&A function. You should see a bottom if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We want to hear from you how things are going for you and what you're thinking about. So we're going to pose some questions to you and have you respond. And we're going to do that through the chat function. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should also see a chat button. You can click on that. You should see a chat box open to the right-hand side of your Zoom screen. And again, we're going to throw you some questions there. And we are then going to have you respond using the chat. So Q&A function for the questions you have for the panelists, chat for engaging with us when we ask you questions. All right, so without further ado, we do want to get a little engagement from the audience. Again, please put your responses in the chat. And one other thing to note, when you are using the chat feature, please make sure that your responses are going to everyone. you should see a little option to decide who your responses are going to. And again, please make sure they're going to everyone. So let's give this a try. My first question to all of you here on the webinar, and we had lots of registrations, so hopefully there's lots of you. First question via the chat is, what are you hoping to get out of today's webinar? So take a moment, type that into the chat, make sure that your responses are going to everyone, and then when you're ready, you can hit enter. And I'm going to give maybe 20 seconds for folks to think about that. Type your response into the chat, and hopefully we'll see those coming in just a moment. Getting some good responses in the chat. Again, I would encourage others who are thinking about this to type your thoughts in. What are you hoping to get out of today's webinar? Seeing lots of mentions of desire for new ideas, some best practices, good practices, want all the things. I can't promise to provide all the things, but we'll do our best. Lessons learned from successes, things that have worked well. I'm going to give just another 10 seconds. Please get your responses entered if you would like to enter them. Seeing some comments from our panelists who are fist bump, kind of like, yeah, we got this. We're going to talk about this. All right, and I would encourage the panelists to see what's there in the chat. If anything makes you think about something you want to highlight during your talk, please take note of that. Okay, before we begin, I have one more question for you. So again, hopefully you had your chance to enter your response for the first question. I'm going to have you hold steady. We're going to ask you a new question. Same drill, you're doing a great job. Respond via the chat. Love to hear from you all. What's one idea you have for how to effectively educate NewtoNature visitors about responsible recreation? So take a moment, think about that second question. Again, ideas you have, maybe something you've tried, something that's worked, maybe something that didn't work that you can let us know about. And again, once you have a chance to type that in, you can hit enter. Already seeing the giving people bite-sized pieces that are more easily digestible, showing them examples of what not to do, working with lots of partners. Again, some of these things are things we're going to hit on for sure in our talk today. Consequences of not so good behavior. Positive in-person interactions. Again, lots of good stuff coming in. Thanks everyone for sharing. I'm going to give another maybe 15 seconds for you to share all your great ideas. Love making responsible recreation cool. Promoting the right practices, good practices, right? Help people see where we want to go, not just the trees we don't want them to hit, so to speak. And lots of good stuff there. So thank you all for sharing. I think we're going to riff off of a lot of the things people have shared, take it in some new directions. So with that, I'm going to invite our panelists, turn their videos on to join us. Thank you all again, our wonderful panelists, for being here to share wisdom with us. 2 reminders to our panelists before we officially jump in. Again, just to the extent you can, please emphasize concrete takeaways we can all learn from. And just remember again that our current webinar viewers as well as future viewers may have a range of experience with this stuff, so please try to speak to a range of audiences. All right, so with that, first question to the panelists, I think I'm going to pitch this one first to Katie and then maybe have Elizabeth riff off of it. Why do we need to think about educating NewtoNature visitors about responsible recreation? What is the problem? What are we concerned about?
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to pass that to Elizabeth to tee us up, and then I'll regale you all with the wild tales that we've experienced since the pandemic began.
Yeah, Katie and I have worked out a tag team for this one. So, hey, I'm Elizabeth. I am an archaeologist. So I'm coming at this from one really small slice of outdoor recreation and outdoor engagement. But as an archaeologist, I'm very specially trained to see evidence of human interaction with the environment. And starting way back, more than 15 years ago at this point, in the recession, we started seeing that there was more visitation and a different kind of visitation. It was a lot of these NewtoNature tourists and NewtoNature visitors who perhaps weren't staying on the trail, who perhaps had not learned a lot of the leave no trace principles, and they were engaging in the landscape in a fundamentally different way than people who, had already been hiking, biking, OHVing, and recreating in other ways for their whole lives. And so we've really needed to adapt to that. And I think we were all in our own corners developing a lot of really great adaptive strategies. And then the pandemic hit so hard. I don't know if you guys remember May 2020, but I remember it extremely well. I was in my first 6 months as public archaeologist. I was very disappointed that I wasn't able to get out and meet the public, but I was thinking to myself that it was okay because the public wasn't really getting out anyway. Everyone else learned before I did that you could go outside where it felt safer. And so when the nice weather hit in May, everyone did go outside. And we had some really heartbreaking instances of damage to archaeological sites. Specifically down in Gunlock Reservoir, that comes to mind, where we had so many visitors from not just St. George, where Gunlock Reservoir is just to the north of, but people from as far away as Las Vegas and some places in Arizona coming and visiting. And that state park could not handle that visitation. They ended up turning off the waterfall to dissuade people from coming, but the damage was done. The litter was intense, and from my point of view, the worst thing that happened was someone found a rock imagery site, a petroglyph, on a boulder along the shores of Gunlock Reservoir, and they rolled it into the reservoir. That's a lot of effort to move a boulder that size. And it's puzzling to me why it would happen, but we saw more of these puzzling behaviors throughout the pandemic, especially on archaeological sites. So we've been working really hard, to think about how to educate NewtoNature tourists, but we really had a fire lit under our butts starting at the pandemic. And I'm really proud to say that this group here has some really fantastic ideas. So now I'm actually going to kick it over to Katie to knock this one over the plate. Thanks, guys.
Hey everybody, Katie Bouet here. I run a communications consulting group called the Outdoor Advocacy Project, and I'm also the communications co-chair for the communications committee for the Recreate Responsibly Coalition. And what I'm going to do now is kind of zoom us back out. I think we had a really great close to home example of what happened during the pandemic and kind of that real big culmination of all these small increases and these small issues that were starting to happen that we knew were happening. And then once the pandemic hit, everything got magnified so quickly. And what we saw happening at Gunlock Reservoir was happening across the entire country. There are stories from every corner of the country, from land managers and archaeologists, conservation folks who saw an immediate need for us to address, the issues that we had all been trying to fix for a long time. And suddenly it kind of became, triage mode. And so what we did with the Recreate Responsibly Coalition was, it was born during the pandemic. It was born in March 2020, and it was land management agencies from National Park Service to local, municipal parks in rural counties had shared issues and a lack of shared guidance on what we could all do together. And so we came together to try and figure out just language that everyone could use because it was such a reactive moment. So we all tried to come together and ended up with, and now we have over 2,000 member groups who are working on this. But the issue of NewtoNature visitors and educating recreation in a responsible way has proven to be an ongoing issue. The first time that we came up with this iteration of the guidelines to get folks basically just to go outdoors in a respectful, thoughtful way. That's really what it boils down to, right? We just want folks to go outside and do the right thing, tread lightly, be kind to others. So we came up with this guideline of language that then very quickly we realized could be applied to the ongoing issues. These conversations will continue to happen in various different forms, various specific seasons, or weather events or cultural events that pop up. And new visitors will keep coming. And so we've kind of brought everyone together to be able to address those issues as they pop up. And I think, we've all worked so hard to encourage folks to get outside. That's kind of what all of our jobs are in different ways, right? And now we've realized that the next step there is, how do we encourage folks to get outside in sustainable, stewardship-minded ways? And I think I'll pass the mic now to the other folks here who are doing work on this in so many different ways. I think it takes all of us doing what we're doing to make that impact happen collectively.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth and Katie. I think that tees up a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And what I'm really hearing, and it echoes some of the things that are in the chat, is that we need to be thinking about, again, what do we want people to do, right? Not all the things we don't want them to do, although that's important, but like, where are we trying to go here? And I heard you, Katie, just conclude with this idea of stewardship, sustainable visitation, recreation. And so I think I'm going to pitch that to you, Matt. I know you think a lot about stewardship and sustainable recreation. So I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit more about, like, what do those things actually mean? What are we aiming for? And before you jump in, just a reminder to everyone, if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I'm seeing some good conversation in the chat, so I appreciate everyone having some conversation there. So taking that one to you, Matt.
Great transition. It was perfect. Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Blocker. I work with the Bureau of Land Management out of our headquarters office, the Division of Recreation and Visitor Services here in Salt Lake City, Utah. So nice to meet everybody. And that's a perfect question. The stewardship and sustainable recreation go hand in hand, in my opinion, and it's so crucial at this moment in time. You can't have one without the other. In order to get sustainable recreation, we must have stewards. So sustainable recreation to me is preserving those recreation setting characteristics that we strive for, either backcountry, front country, whatever it may be, that produce those experiences that we all love to get from outdoor recreation. So it's maintaining that while balancing that with the resource protection. So we must protect the resources while we're maintaining these experiences that we get from outdoor recreation. So that makes perfect sense to me, but we have to do that from now and into the future. The key is preserving those experiences that people are getting right now for the future. That's the sustainable part. And then to key off into the stewardship approach, I think it's so crucial with the vast landscape that we have, not only the BLM, but state parks, national parks, and Forest Service lands, all public lands. That's a lot of public lands. And we need to try to make that connection, that emotional connection to people, to feel these landscapes and to take ownership of these landscapes, because we can't be everywhere and anywhere, any of the agencies. We need to have as many stewards out there. And I hope by the end of this, we can empower everybody on the call today to think of themselves as stewards, not only setting good examples in their behaviors, but also positively educating folks, like I saw in the chat there, of why not do this, and why do we need to do it this way. I think forming that emotional connection to the landscape is crucial. I heard Elizabeth's description of what happened down there in St. George. There was a lot of emotional response there. And if that recreationist does not have that emotional connection to the land, they're not going to have that response. So embedding that and empowering people with that sense of ownership for their public lands is crucial to stewardship. So
I really appreciate that. And again, I think it creates a good foundation to start to talk about, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of what do we need to communicate and to who? So I think, Bianca, I'm going to pitch that question to you, because I know the Utah Office of Tourism thinks a lot about this. So if we're trying to cultivate better stewardship and sustainable recreation, what do we need to communicate and who do we need to reach?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. One of the key initiatives of our office is our Forever Mighty initiative, which is our responsible travel and stewardship initiative. And that has been a priority of our offices for the past few years. And I was just telling my fellow panelists before the call that I'm celebrating my 2-year anniversary with the office, right as the pandemic was starting, and we were sensing this urgency of stewardship and responsible travel, and having no idea the tidal wave of attention and visitation that we were going to receive in our national parks and our natural areas. And so Forever Mighty has been a key priority of ours and continues to be as we see NewtoNature and other types of visitors coming more frequently to Utah. And I think for us, one of our key priorities in communication is sharing preparation and communicating the importance of being prepared. And that is a relevant topic no matter where you are on the spectrum of new to nature or new to Utah, or a very, very experienced visitor to Utah. That means something perhaps a little bit different to everybody, but preparation is key to, I think, every experience in the outdoors, whether it's your own safety and well-being, and making sure that you're prepared for the elements and not being a drain on community resources that come in and help you in the unfortunate case if you're lost or hurt or injured. And then it's also, preparing yourself to be a steward, to be a leader, and showing and demonstrating that leadership of stewardship and responsibility. And so I think a key priority of ours is, if you're new to Utah or experienced in Utah, preparation, whether you're early in the planning process or on the verge of your trip or even in community, preparation is key.
I appreciate that. I know, Elizabeth, you have some things you want to say. I first want to get Danielle's voice in the room, and I'm curious, I know, Danielle, you think a lot about this as well. So I'm going to ask, what are your thoughts about what we need to communicate and who do we need to reach? And maybe you want to kind of riff and build on what Bianca's saying or go in a slightly different direction.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about sustainable recreation, how important it is. Bianca was right on track. I mean, preparation is so important, and there are resources available right now, that you can help educate users on how to be responsible, sustainable, and recreate in a responsible way. The Leave No Trace 7 principles and the Tread Lightly, Tread principles are really great starting points for new education, or for new users to get that education that they need, provide a foundation for their adventures in the outdoors and how to stay safe and how to do it in a responsible way. I also wanted to talk about consistency in messaging. Just like any other advertising or marketing campaign, too many messages can be really confusing, especially when you're talking to a new user who most likely doesn't have that foundation or background in conservation, sustainability, ethics education. These are big topics to kind of push on somebody who may not have ever even heard of these things before. So I would encourage everyone, rely on your existing resources, on time-tested messages and organizations to help you with your messaging. There's differences between enthusiast groups, motorized and non-motorized, and even segmentation within those categories. You talk about the difference between single track users, dirt bike users, and full-size four-wheel drive. You talk about the differences between people who want to camp and people who are rock climbing. These are different audiences, and they need to hear the same messages, but in different ways. So again, relying on organizations who are subject matter experts who can help you with that messaging. Even terminology within your messaging can be lightning rods that can, shut people down. So there are organizations, Tread Lightly, Leave No Trace, Recreate Responsibly, who have these messages honed in, tuned in already for specific audiences to help them really, accept the messaging and implement it. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was just engage with your audience, and whenever possible, encourage them to get involved, have them join a club, where there's resources and people who've been doing this for a long time that can help them, and give people the opportunity to give back. When people get their hands dirty in this dirt and learn what it means to manage public lands, they really begin to care and take ownership of those areas. So, speaking to them in the voice that they need to hear and giving them an opportunity to get involved, I think, are so important when you talk about conservation efforts and education.
Danielle, I really appreciate those points, that don't recreate the wheel. There are people who do this for a job and they think a lot about it. So at least build on what they've already developed. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat about how people are doing that, creating messages that are specific to their areas and trying to bring in these messages that others have developed. I also just note for the audience that we're going to have a lot of things we share via the chat, maybe some links and resources in the post-session summary, we will also share those. So just know that we will make sure you also have an opportunity to grab that if you don't grab the chat today. One of the other things I'm hearing and what Danielle is saying that I think is really important, and I speak as a collaboration and conflict resolution professional, but is this idea of bringing people in as part of the problem solving enterprise, right? Like if we care about these places and we want to keep them special or we want to keep them to be great places to recreate, we're all going to have to be part of doing that. And I'm kind of hearing from what people are saying is cultivating that stewardship ethic, helping people see how they're part of it, can be really powerful and tied to what Matt said earlier about building that connection to place, right? That might, I think part of that can be getting people actually connected so that they really do care. Elizabeth, I know you had some more you wanted to say, so feel free to build in the same direction or go in a new direction.
It's right here, right? We're working out and we're sort of like testing out how to make communication that sends out a message and that message is positive and that message is picked up organically by people who want to be a part of something. And someone, Natalie Oi, had a really great point, I think, in the question and answer. And that was, well, if we're singling out folks as new to nature tourists and putting it on them, like it's the new to nature tourists who are causing all the problem, that's one, factually incorrect. We've had the problem of damage since time immemorial. And two, closing doors on people. And so I just want to highlight that. That's true. And I think when we're talking here in this group about new to nature tourists, we're doing it in the context of how is this a specific audience that we can engage in a positive way, and instead of gatekeeping, really open up the gates, really invite them in and say, hey, we want you to engage in this. We're so excited that you're getting out there and that you're doing this. Let's just be mindful as we go and have a great time together that we need to be aware of, in my case, we need to be aware that archaeological sites are sensitive. And here's how we're going to engage with them today. So I just wanted to highlight Natalie's comment. I thought it was really great. And I think it ties in really well with this idea of gatekeeping and this idea of keeping things positive and everything Bianca and Danielle and Matt were getting at. So
I really, again, appreciate that point because I think it's an important clarification that in some ways what we're talking about here is all people in nature. How do we do that well? How do we do more people in nature well? That really the target audience might just not be people who are technically new to nature, but just how do all people who come and visit, especially when there's a lot more of us, do so sustainably? How do we all become stewards? So I would just encourage the audience to think about a lot of these things may apply to if you have new to nature visitors, but they might apply just generally. Danielle, it looked like you had a mute off. Did you want to riff off that?
Well, I mean, yes, I've kind of lost my train of thought while I'm looking through the comments and everything, but I did see something in the question and answer regarding, positive messaging as opposed to, finger pointing and shaming and how it gets more, conversation going. And what I would say to that is that may be true. You might get more engagement at the time, but it's not, I would assume, very productive. When you're always pointing the finger at somebody else, all it is doing is inflaming this idea of user conflict on trails. And that's not going to get us to a point where we're being productive and collaborative, right? So everybody loves, I think that, in the moment, kind of heat of the moment, things that you're going back and forth, of course, those get your attention. But in the long run, what are those conversations really giving to the solution to problems? And so that's why it's important to keep those messages positive, because the idea here is collaboration and cooperation. And when you use that negative language or your finger pointing, it shuts that conversation down, right? And we need more people in this game, not fewer. So that would be my answer to that question.
Danielle, I really also appreciate you bringing that up, and this whole idea of using shame as a social change tactic is proven to not. There's lots of psychology behind that. We won't go there right now, but there's a lot of research on that is not the way to lead to positive social change. And I would just emphasize we're looking for collaboration because we need people to work together to problem solve, right? It's not just collaboration so that we can all get along here. It's let's actually fix this problem. Let's protect these resources. And I think there's just enough psychology research to point the arrow towards being firm right? But like not necessarily shaming people, but helping them see what they need to do and helping steer them away from certain behaviors and understand why those aren't good for them and others, or the things that they enjoy. So I won't go off. I could go on a whole rant about that. I will not. I am seeing from Bianca that she might want to chime in. So I'm going to pass it to you, Bianca.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Danielle is saying, and Elizabeth, certainly not shaming or excluding people from the conversation and being part of the solution. And I think part of that goes back to, partnership and relying on people who are subject matter experts. And in the example of Tread Lightly, our office partnered with them last year on a campaign that was aimed at communicating with, quite honestly, group that we have not traditionally, done a whole lot to reach out to. And through the subject matter expertise that they bring, we were able to communicate with that motorized recreator and that user, avoiding words that are exclusive or not encouraging the types of behavior that we want, and then selecting the types of language that is more positive and inclusive. And so that just shows why partnership is really important, and I hope is a takeaway from this conversation. And also worth mentioning that our office is in a partnership with Leave No Trace, and we'll be working on some resources to share industry-wide, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that too. And both in the case of Tread Lightly or Leave No Trace, whether you're experienced or perhaps new to outdoor recreation, it applies and means something to you, and is really an important part of our work this year.
So I want to build on everything everyone's saying and really kind of get the rubber to hit the road in terms of, get a sense of there's some people who put a lot of time and energy into like what we need to communicate. We can build on that. Don't necessarily need to recreate that wheel. And there are a lot of different people that different audiences need to reach. So audiences need to reach, basically. So I'm curious to hear from you all. How do we communicate the message, and how do we reach different audiences? What are different tools, different approaches we can use? What's been proven to be effective or maybe not so effective? And I'm going to really encourage you to kind of get concrete here. And I think, Katie, I might pitch that one to you first if you're willing to take it.
Yeah, that's great. I think Recreate Responsibly is an excellent model to kind of start this conversation from, because what we really wanted to do is look at the fact that these resources are out there, this language is out there. There are so many people doing the work in this space. And so we kind of created our guidelines with this vision of being a very broad, very approachable language umbrella that we can kind of start, like that's like the highest level, right? And then everyone has different needs. We all have different messaging requirements. We have over 2,000 members from federal, state, and local agencies, outdoor retailers, nonprofit conservation organizations, book publishers, all sorts of folks who have different audiences, different messaging needs, different activities that they are specifically dealing with, different places across the country. And so we created this framework that now everyone can take, and we create a cohesive branding, a cohesive messaging, but we can all tailor it to our specific needs, our specific audiences, so that we hit as many touch points, as many different perspectives as possible with this cohesive language. Because it's a really it's a yes and, yes, we need a unified messaging, and we all have such specific things that we need to communicate in our own unique places in this tourism and recreation space. So for us, that really boils down to the idea of the toolkit. Anyone who is familiar with my work knows that the word toolkit comes out of my mouth a lot. We created the basic toolkit. So anyone can download this. It has our 6 core Recreate Responsibly guidelines. I put those in the chat. Very simple language that you've probably heard before. Leave No Trace is an organization we have an MOU with, and they are one of the guidelines is to leave no trace. But that broad language is then able to be drilled down for folks and applied however you want to use it. So we've had a baseline. Our main edition has had over 12,000 toolkit downloads and has been translated into into 9 languages. And we've developed 7 state chapters specifically to work on these unique issues that everyone has. And I think, building something we all can use has been the way for us, and then drilling down as needed. So we have different editions. Someone was talking about wildlife needing a little bit more of a call out. We're working on a wildlife specific edition. We've done off-road edition, winter edition, a water edition that's coming out soon. So I think it's remaining dynamic, but also building a really strong foundation for the communication is key, and getting folks to do a great group edit. It's probably the best thing about the Recreate Responsibly Coalition, in my opinion. We kind of break out into different working groups on specific issues and do group edits on the messaging. So we'll all get on a Zoom together and say, okay, here are 6 core guidelines. How do we apply these to water safety? And you'll have, like, you know, someone from marine sanctuaries, someone from a local lake, someone who works with families and like safety organization, and everyone comes together to workshop the language together to figure out what will work best for everyone while maintaining the integrity of some of this harder language, especially around safety and preparedness, but making it inviting and inclusive. So I'm all about the group effort, and, you know, collaborative communication, I think, is what's really key here.
We might come back to that if we have time. I'm going to ask the other panelists if there are any other kind of concrete things you want to add to that, build on, go a different direction in terms of how we can communicate the message and reach different audiences. If you want to talk about specific audiences or specific approaches for specific audiences that you've learned from, that would be great. All right,
Katie,
Bianca.
Yeah, I'll jump in. As she says, she's toolkit is her favorite word, and it turns out it's one of ours too. But as I mentioned earlier, our partnership with Forever Mighty and Leave No Trace is going to have some really powerful and really tangible resources and assets in the next couple of months, really as we share our 7 Leave No Trace principles with the state and with our industry. And I think that's another kind of key area or audience to speak to. And that's something that our office is really focused on, is communicating with our industry, communicating with businesses, with frontline employees who can really make an impact to people who may not go to a travel website or to a land manager's website, but are actually going to be interacting with the community and need to have these really critical messages shared with them. So I will definitely share in the chat a link for folks to sign up to our industry page to get the latest information, as well as our travel.utah.gov, our industry page, where all of these resources will be shared in mid-May in advance of another busy year for visitation to Utah. So we're really excited by this partnership. And again, to Katie's point, that consistency of messaging of Leave No Trace is really going to be a powerful tool for us in sharing these really critical messages to people who are new and to Utah, and people who are perhaps veterans who want to, become even more sophisticated travelers.
Thanks for that, Bianca. I'm recalling, Elizabeth, that you talked about a little bit of research that might be related to this in our prior conversations. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
I would love to. So we archaeologists don't usually study contemporary human behavior, but we kind of know how. So I worked with a graduate student in the University of Utah's Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Department to craft an experiment that is using an archaeological site as our backdrop. How can we craft a sign that promotes what we're calling pro-social behavior? And it's not just us calling it that, right? That's sort of the psychological literature. So there are pro-social behaviors like staying on the trail, not touching rock imagery for our purposes, and the basic sort of Leave No Trace principles, but casting them in the way of saying, we need your help to engage in this behavior so that this area stays intact and enjoyable for other people. That's that pro-social aspect, reminding people that they're a part of a larger whole, that they love the people in the larger whole, and that they have something that they can do right now to make themselves feel good about how they're interacting with the environment. And so his experiment was so cool. He created a pro-social sign saying, we've got rock imagery here. Help us protect it by staying on the trail, by not touching it, by not etching anything onto it. Then he had another condition, which was a modified threat appeal. And that was a standard sign that the Bureau of Land Management, who's managing this area, that they typically use that says, if you damage anything, it is an ARPA violation, the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. And so it's really saying, if you do this, you're liable to be criminally prosecuted. And just as an FYI, Matt can tell you more about this. We do prosecute people here in Utah. We do find people who have damaged. And then the last condition was a control condition where he had no signage for a period of time. He snuck out there and hid a wildlife camera very cleverly so that he could still see the rock imagery panel. And then he tallied what kinds of behaviors people engaged in at that rock imagery panel in each of these 3 conditions. In the threat appeal condition, we had several people touch the site, which the problem there is that like the oils and dirt from your fingers can actually change the biome of that piece of rock and can make it more likely to fall apart. Also, if there was any pigment on there, even if it's just microscopic right now, you could physically like rub that off. It's not great to touch rock imagery or historic inscriptions. So under the threat appeal, the modified threat appeal, we had a little bit of touching, kind of more touching than I would have expected, honestly. People really want to engage in that way. Under the pro-social condition, we had a marked decrease. It was more than statistically significant. So we were very excited to see that by telling people, hey, we want to include you in this human community, here's how, that really does work. And interestingly, in the no sign condition, that's the only time that we had people not just touching the rock imagery site, but actually defacing it. A group of people went out and scratched their names into things, etched some other like English words into it. And so while that was really depressing to see, we did have a camera out there. So again, going back to that threat appeal, even if we're not saying it, it's still kind of there, guys. So this is Matt Podolinsky. He actually is graduating this spring from the University of Utah. If anyone is interested in reading this thesis, please contact me and I'll get it to you because it was fascinating and it was an honor to be a part of. So thanks for letting me talk about it, Danielle.
I appreciate that, Elizabeth. There's a few things I'm hearing in what you're saying. And one is that those signs we have on the Federal Land Management Agency's property are better than no signs. So it's good. And maybe we can improve our signage. And I think there's more research, and thus this one study that points in that direction. So work we can do on a lot of different fronts, but probably better to have no sign or to have a sign than no sign. I'm also hearing what you're saying, Elizabeth, this opportunity to let's experiment, let's try new things, let's study that, let's get data, let's figure out what's really working. And I think some of these coalitions people are talking about are probably doing some of that, and we can keep leaning into that. And being an academic, we love that stuff. Like, how do we support positive social change? So if we don't have good answers, let's look for it, but let's also not recreate the wheel, is something I'm hearing from a lot of people today. Before I maybe move into a little bit more of talking about partnerships and collaboration, building on what people have said, I'm curious if any of our other speakers want to add to this. How do we communicate to the messages? What seems to work? How do we communicate messages? What seems to work well, not so well? Danielle, Matt, others, anything you want to add?
I could only, reiterate what I had said before about just the, engaging, being inclusive, avoiding that negative talk and finger pointing kind of shaming techniques. And then, I think it's important to remember most people, especially new enthusiasts, they want to do the right thing and they're in a positive way to conservation messaging. You just have to figure out, how to work with them. And that's what organizations, especially at the club, local club level, that's where you can really get your hands and hooks into them, because they're people with local knowledge. They're familiar with the trails, they're familiar with the resources, and in many cases, they've been around for decades. So they are a wealth of knowledge on resources and just providing people a community, which is really, really important. People have really looked to online forums and those kinds of things, not traditional club memberships, but those people are still involved. And so, relying on that local voice, I think, is a great opportunity to, engage with those audiences. And it provides a sense of authenticity as well. When you're talking to somebody who knows what they're talking about and has experience and real knowledge of these places, these new users are really have the opportunity to learn a lot and, again, engage with those areas in a meaningful way.
And I was going to add to that how incredible the amount of information that we have in all the different groups. It's just sitting on this call, it's overwhelming to hear for myself. And imagine that NewtoNature tourist trying to digest all this. That is the importance of us coming together with a unified voice as much as we can to set folks up for success when they're getting out there. When they're making the effort to know before they go, we need to set them up for success and not overwhelm them with contents here and there and everywhere, because there's a tidal wave of really, really effective messaging. It's just digesting it. And everybody knows the attention span of me, anybody, is this. So we need to be able to grab that new person and make it digestible, the content that we all have. And then also I wanted to add a little plug that it is really important, if you know the BLM office, that you're going to contact them early and often to get successful tips, tricks, locations, and rules and regulations for that area. And I can give information to anybody on this call about contacting your local BLM office.
Matt, thank you for that. And those points hit on a few things that one segue really nicely into where I want to go next, which is digging more into collaboration around messaging, right? And part of that's not recreating the wheel, but part of it's also sending consistent messages. And I think what you're hitting on, Matt, which is really important, is this idea that it might be better to do less but better, right? That like not more messages and somebody's just getting bombarded and they tune it out, but like few really key messages, they're hearing it consistently. And I will note for our viewers that our first session in this Red Emerald training series was on developing an effective online presence. And that was one of the key themes in that session as well. Less but better. Do what you're doing really well, but don't bombard people because people will just tune out. So maybe we can riff off of both of those themes in addressing this question, which I think, Bianca, I'll probably pitch this one to you first, which is really around, we're talking about the importance of consistent messaging, collaboration, and trying to educate NewtoNature visitors and just anybody else we want to recreate responsibly. I'm curious to hear more about that, particularly some specifics about what we need to do and some examples of like how we can do this. Bianca, you take that?
Yeah, it does touch upon a little bit of what I've already mentioned, but it's worth mentioning again, that partnering with organizations who have credibility with a user group, know the right language, is really critical. And I think Matt brings up a really good point, just that collaboration at a local level to know, where in your local area are you feeling, pinched, or where is there an overabundance of people? Where can we redirect people in a place that's responsible, that's prepared to accept visitors? So I think just partnership at all levels, I think, is really important. At the state level, we certainly do that to the extent we can. And with nonprofit organizations like Tread Lightly, we're able to, emphasize certain language, steer away from others that don't necessarily create the right behaviors that we want. And just collaborating. I think everyone on this call, our office has had some sort of partnership and relationship with, and I think that is so important. And just, letting everyone on this webinar series know that we're all in this together and that we can reach out to each other and communicate better with each other. So that would be another opportunity for me to just kind of express that partnership is really important.
I'm going to pass this question to the rest of our panelists here in a moment, but I think part of what I'm also hearing what Bianca is saying is that some of us have this role to play as a convener, right? And the Office of Tourism's done that in some ways across the state, but even thinking about if your region's having some real problems, could you or somebody else convene the right parties to say, let's talk about this, let's get some consistent messaging. How do we push this out through our businesses, our employees? Could the employees be frontline workers and helping people think about responding or recreating responsibly? So I think that that's also part of this kind of collaboration, consistent messaging question, is thinking about who can actually get the right people working together whether at a broader scale or even a local scale. And I'm seeing some nodding heads from our other panelists. So I'm going to pass it to our panelists. Katie, you look like you might be eager to chime in on this, and then maybe I'll go to Elizabeth.
I've been chomping at the bit for the right moment to propose to this entire group of panelists and attendees that there are 7 Recreate Responsibly state chapters. Utah does not have one. California has one. Washington has one. We are this close to convening a Utah state chapter, and I would love to see that happen. So what a great solution to the problems you just presented. I'll let you hop in, Elizabeth. I thought you wanted me to.
Yeah, I'm all for it. Like, count me in, whatever you need. Yeah, so we've got on this panel and then across the state of Utah, we have folks like Bianca who are really tied in to a lot of people who work in this messaging world. And then also people like me, I'm more of the subject matter expert. I'm very new to this idea of how to talk to people. I deal with dead people. I cannot emphasize that enough. Talking to the living is fairly new to me, but I do know a lot about how to go to, thanks, Bianca in the chat. I do know a lot about the subject matter, right? I do know a lot about how to visit all kinds of different sites. That's something that's really nuanced. It's going to change different times of the year, depending on the weather, what kind of, hiking poles do you have, et cetera. And so when you're thinking about who you want to contact, what's the level of granularity you want to get into? If you want to get into super nerd territory, you're going to want someone like me. If you want someone who is able to communicate really broadly, someone like Katie, Danielle, Bianca is a great resource. And if you want someone who has been out there on the ground and who has seen it all, someone like Matt is what you're going to need. So there's a lot, it's really hard to navigate. So I would really recommend going to someone like Bianca, who's keyed in regionally, and she might be able to advise you.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. I suspect our panelists might get a lot of follow-up from this session based on what's happening in the chat. I also want to say I appreciate our panelists being responsive to the questions that have come in through Q&A. Your ability to multitask far exceeds mine. So thank you for responding to those questions, because we're probably not going to have time to really talk about them. So I appreciate that. I want to start to wrap us up because we have a few things to do before we finally conclude, and we are quite committed to getting people out of here at 1 o'clock Mountain Time. So to wrap us up, I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to do one rapid fire, key, concrete, doable next step you would recommend for a tourism business, local nonprofit, municipal government, somebody else trying to educate NewtoNature visitors or just otherwise encourage good stewardship and responsible recreation. So let's keep it quick. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences most. Katie, I'm going to pass it to you and then kind of just move along the chain of how you're showing up on my Zoom screen.
Unsurprisingly, my one action is to join the Recreate Responsibly Coalition. Anyone can do so for free. Organizations can do so on activated memberships, but join it. Do it right now. It'll take you 30 seconds to join the coalition and then download the Recreate Responsibly guidelines, print a few copies out, find a high touch point area, whether it's a shop front or a trailhead that you're managing, and slap it up there and invite people to recreate responsibly.
Perfect. Bianca, I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, I would similarly say that, reaching out to our office and our destination and partner relations team, if you have any needs, we have our Forever Mighty toolkit that's coming out in the next few weeks that will be infused with Leave No Trace. And there's an opportunity for everyone, no matter where you are in the industry or in outdoor recreation, for you to play a role. Everyone has a job to fulfill in sharing the stewardship message. So I would just encourage folks to sign up and learn more, and we'll be sharing more information soon.
Elizabeth, you're next.
So short, and I've got it in the chat. The one thing you can do right this second is take the pledge to protect the past. That's going to let everyone know, like, I'm serious about this. And we hold your feet to the fire a little bit by giving you 6 weeks worth of emails about how you can protect the past, what is Utah archaeology, and why it's so important to us. So I'm sure that as you run through that, you're going to glean some information that you guys can use to pass along to people, and you guys can really become the influencers. So that's what I got. Pledge to protect the past.
Danielle.
so much to say, but at the very first thing I would say is, send us an email and check in with us first so that we can help you on this journey, and what you're trying to accomplish. Check in with each of these organizations and ask how they can be involved in the efforts that you have right now. Again, relying on existing messaging and resources. We're all here to help you, use and find that voice that you need, and using that consistent messaging elevates the conversation and makes it so much more impactful. I loved what Bianca was saying in terms of preparation and education. My dad always says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, so knowing what you're doing before you head out is going to save you a ton of problems down the road. And then collaborating with organizations that can provide opportunities for people to give back. I'll give a plug for Tread Lightly. Of course, we have our Tread Lightly Care program where enthusiasts can actually go to our website and provide information on places that need a little bit of love, that need some attention. And we've got the industry and agency support to get that real work done on the ground. We collaborate with agencies both through funding opportunities and then clubs at the local level to get boots on the ground. So I'll provide all those links to our media library and the Tread Lightly Care program in the comments, but reach out to us so we can know what you need and we can provide that service to you.
Thank you, Danielle. And Matt.
I'm going to dial it down to the individual level, down to the basics, because it is up to everybody on this call. Everyone knows the messaging. Everybody knows what to do on this call. It's passing on to others, setting good examples, being the ambassadors of public lands or the stewards of public lands to set the example or positively educate others. So your next recreation experience, try to think of yourself as an ambassador or a steward of public lands and contact your BLM office. So that's my plug.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you all. So seriously, thank you panelists for all your suggestions, stories, inspiration. I get to learn a lot through these sessions. I can tell from the chat engagement, people are taking away a lot. They also appreciate your organizations and what you're doing. So we've got some good partners here on the call. I want to turn back to the audience as we wrap up. So audience, we're not done with you. Hold steady. I want to take a moment to hear what you all, your participants, are taking away from this session. So we're going to do this via chat, and this is a good chance for you to encode whatever you've learned through this lesson. As we did before, I'm going to put a prompt in the chat. I'm going to ask you all to respond via chat. And again, just make sure your responses are going to everyone so we can all see what you have to say. So participants via chat, what is one thing you're taking away from this training? Take a moment, think about that. Hopefully there's a lot more than one, but focus on one. When you're ready, type your response in, hit enter. Curious to see what everyone has to say. We'll give you about 20-30 seconds to do that. And as those come in, you can see what each other are saying. All right, I hope we're going to get a few more in via the chat. I do want to wrap us up and get us out of here on time. So while those come in, just want to thank the audience for your participation. Thank you again to our panelists. We hope everyone gained a lot of insight from this webinar, hopefully identified some new partners you can work with. A reminder that this webinar is recorded and will be available on the Red Emerald website or Red Emerald Training Program website for future viewing. Please do spread the word. If you found this helpful, encourage other people to check it out. In a moment, once we get a few more chat responses in the chat, I will put that website link in there again, so you can easily go to our website. We have a number of upcoming sessions, so we hope to see you at those sessions. The next one is on May 3rd. It's from 12 to 1 o'clock. We'll focus on how to prepare for the return of more international guests and visitors. For a lot of you, that's an important topic. You can learn more about that session and future sessions on our Red Emerald Training Program website. And then finally, we want your feedback. We really want to make sure these sessions are meeting the need. So please look for an automatic survey that will be sent to your email once this session concludes. It'll be really short. It should take you just a minute or two to fill it out. And your doing so will really help us make sure that we are serving you, other tourism businesses, NGOs, those who are working on these topics. So thank you in advance for doing that. With that, a final thank you again to our panelists. I'm going to put the Red Emerald Training Program website link in the chat one more time so it's there for you. And we hope to see all of you again at our May 3rd session. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.